Welcome everyone. This is the fourth of four videos on qualitative data management. This video is about coding procedures. In this session, we will cover three main points. We will define what coding of qualitative data is. Then we will look at different approaches to coding qualitative data. And then we will look at a brief example of how to develop a coding frame and structure for data analysis. If we think about what coding is, we may consider that it entails labeling and systematically organizing unstructured data from interview transcripts, field notes, documents, videos, and so on, in order to determine themes, relationships, and patterns between them. Coding can be done by hand using a document processor and/or a software like NVivo or Taget. And it can be deductive or inductive. In the deductive approach to coding, you have a predefined set of codes assigned to the data. Predetermined codes may be based on a specific conceptual framework used or topic area of interest. For instance, agroecological farm interventions or farmer research networks inclusion practices. The challenges include that starting with predefined codes may incur the risk of having a bias towards the expected answers and may overlook other important information in the data. Some examples of deductive coding can be agroecological farm interventions may, for instance, use agroecological principles as codes to identify the extent of their implementation. Farmer research networks inclusion practices may use codes derived from the farmer research network principles in order to determine their degree of implementation. In inductive coding, codes are open as they are derived from the data and allow theory to emerge from data. Typically, this is an approach used within grounded theory. When looking at individual data samples, codes can be assigned based on relevant or important topics that arise. When looking at a set of data samples, we usually find that there will be recurrent codes among them, but may also need new ones. Other times, we may need to split a code into two or change an existing one after we have gone through the whole dataset. Challenges includes the fact that it requires a systematic approach in order to avoid miscoding data, which takes more time and energy. It is important to note that the two approaches are not mutually exclusive and they can often be combined. For instance, we could start by using a deductive approach by applying some codes based on our topic of interest and then develop new ones inductively based on recurrent and relevant aspects from the data. The approach we undertake to coding will differ slightly based on who is doing it. Is it you, the person who did the transcriptions, a person allocated only for coding, or will they also carry out the analysis? Or perhaps, is there a larger team where different people are assigned different roles, such as transcribing, coding, analyzing? Depending on who is carrying out the coding exercise, there will be several things that will be arranged accordingly. For instance, in my case, when I get the chance, I prefer to personally transcribe audio interviews and carry out the coding exercise. In this way, I feel that I develop more insights and a closer relationship with the data, which help me develop a more accurate relationship with it and a more insightful interpretation. It is worth noting that there is a difference between managing and analyzing quantitative and qualitative data. Whereas with quantitative data, the process of managing and analyzing data can be separated, in qualitative research, aspects of data management overlap with the analytical process. In this slide, we will look at some approaches to coding with the use of an example. The in vivo approach to coding starts from the participant's words in a data excerpt. That is to say, a portion of data extracted from a bigger whole. It is important to not confuse this approach with the computer software for qualitative data analysis that was named after it. When using this method, for instance, former participants may say that employing agroecological practices has improved the quality of the soil in the household, but they were difficult to start because of water scarcity. In this case, we may use two codes for the two important aspects from these words. First, agroecology improved quality of soil, and second, water scarcity. In this way, we captured a positive and a negative aspect under the more general topic of interest of agroecological practices. Process coding focuses on capturing important actions in the data excerpts. Therefore, codes will often be in the ing form in English. This approach is especially used when trying to understand people's behaviors or their actions towards solving a problem or achieving a goal. For instance, using the previous data excerpt, we may code it as improving soil quality and lacking water to start. In open coding, we proceed by breaking data into discrete parts and we assign them initial codes to label them. From the previous example, we could have agroecology improves soil quality and difficult start with water scarcity. It is usually followed by axial coding, a step that consists of establishing connections between the codes created, and finally selective coding, where a core category connects all other categories created. In descriptive coding, we typically use nouns to create codes that identify a topic without further interpretation, such as soil quality and water scarcity. These can later be further interpreted in order to assign more meaning to the data. To develop a coding frame, we go through our dataset and assign the first round of codes to various data excerpts. In this process, the research questions or research interests and/or theoretical framework can guide us. Once we have assigned the first codes, we will go through other data excerpts looking for similar content that could belong to those same codes. We can then have another round through the datasets to review the codes assigned and decide whether changes are needed. Once we have developed a list of codes that are relevant to the data and the research interest, we will collate the excerpts of data from various datasets, for instance, interviews, field notes, and so on, with their codes. We can then look for themes in our codes and group them into categories. For instance, from the previous example, the codes improves soil quality and difficult start with water scarcity may respectively fall under the main categories such as successes and challenges of the main theme, implementing agroecological practices. The categories we have obtained, as briefly mentioned earlier when we looked at the coding approaches, will need to be structured based on their relationships, that is to say, the axial coding. This may require creating also main and subcategories or themes. After having hierarchically structured the categories and themes, we need to evaluate the themes and the thematic structure. That is to say, we need to check whether they can be arranged in a more appropriate way and check how many entries you have in each theme and whether they can be incorporated into other ones or split or even need to be discarded. These steps show a main difference with quantitative data, where the nature of the data doesn't change in the data management and analysis process, whereas in qualitative approach, the management and analysis of data change its nature, such as from audio to text, from text into codes, or sometimes also into different languages. Within a qualitative approach, the final data is very different from the data you had when you started. To visually represent the example mentioned earlier, our overarching theme would be implementing agroecological practices. Then, the two main categories representing the positive and negative aspects identified in the data will be successes and challenges, under which we can place our subcategories of improved soil quality and difficult start with water scarcity. Upon reviewing the structural organization of the themes and categories, though, we may find that we need to add another layer of categories where soil quality falls under the broader category of biophysical and difficult start with water scarcity under that of resources. Some useful tips include using a code book to track all your codes, for instance, Excel spreadsheets or Word documents. And in the code book, assign a description to the code based on the theme or notion it refers to, together with the date and the person who created the code if working within a team. It is important to create codes that are generic enough to be applicable to multiple data excerpts, but at the same time precise enough for the process of analysis. It is helpful to have codes that contrast with each other, with a view to having the positive and negative aspects of a topic or theme. Codes should group portions of data related to the same theme. And when there are more than one coder within a team, it is good practice to have them check each other's coding to ensure accuracy. After coding, what is the next step? That would be developing a narrative from the codes, the categories, and the themes, and write it up in a report or a thesis. But that would go beyond the purpose of the process of data management. These are some useful resources in order to explore some of the points covered in more detail. In case you're interested, the slides for this presentation, as well as lots more resources, can be downloaded from our website at statsforesty.org/resources. Thank you very much.